Heather. Welcome to the Hair Like Hers podcast. It is so great to have you and have this super important conversation with you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk all about hair.
Oh my goodness. Hair and the gut, right? Like not your typical connection that people make, but we're here because you can't have the best hair of your life unless your gut is functioning optimally, and you are the pro. So let's get into it and answer these amazing questions that are life-changing and that not only will give you the best hair of your life, but will just make your body function as it should, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. I'm excited.
So the first question off the bat is about the gut-brain axis. Can you talk to us about it? Because it's obviously a huge conversation. It's been coming up so much not only in the hair industry, but of course everywhere. And I think that especially today with all the different mental health challenges that we're seeing, especially since the pandemic, that this is an important conversation beyond hair and beauty and all that. So take it away.
Okay. So I'll start off with an example because I think setting the stage with kind of understanding this in a real life experience makes it easier to understand. So the example I'll give you is if you have a dog and your dog is jittery. Let's say you're sitting on the couch watching The Bachelor, whatever show you like, I don't know, whatever it is. And all of a sudden someone comes and knocks on your door and your dog goes berserk. That is the perfect example of what happens in your gut when your stress response is triggered. So another example of this would be, let's say that I was super nervous to hop on this podcast and I'm running to the bathroom right beforehand. That's a gut-brain reaction. So your gut and your brain are connected through something called the vagus nerve. It is this super highway that connects the gut and the brain. And it's a bidirectional pathway, meaning that your gut communicates with your brain and your brain communicates right back down to your gut. So anything that's going on in your gut is going to be signaled back up to your brain and vice versa. So in the example of your dog barking out of, this reaction of hearing someone knock on your door, that could be what happens when you all of a sudden get super stressed. You're watching the news and you're really stressed and you have that kind of gut-wrenching experience. We have a lot of terms for this. I have a gut instinct. I had a gut-wrenching experience. I had a gut feeling. So I think even before we knew about the gut-brain reaction or the gut-brain axis, we had a lot of expressions that really actually described this. And now we're just finding even more out about this connection and just how powerful it is, because your gut could function on its own. It's also known as the enteric nervous system, and it has its own brain, basically. So it's constantly communicating. It's where your nervous system is. It's also where your immune system is. And so it's connected to everything. So it might seem kind of crazy to think, well, how is this connected to my hair? But it truly is, because the gut kind of controls everything in the body. So the gut-brain axis, in short, is the communication pathway between your gut and your brain. They're in constant communication and they affect each other. So when your gut is stressed, your brain is stressed, and vice versa.
Right. And I think that ever since I found that out and I learned a little bit about that, it just made me, it kind of takes the pressure off. Like if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling stressed and you can't manage things that are happening in your life as well, or you feel like you're losing control or whatever it is, like all those many emotions that we go through, I think it takes so much pressure off when you recognize like, okay, why am I off? Why am I feeling imbalanced? And you recognize a connection with your stomach and you're like, well, that's been really off lately and I feel terrible and I haven't been digesting as well. And then it's like, okay, well, let me not focus on all those difficulties I'm having, but like actually start treating my stomach a little bit better and start doing things that'll be good for it and to help it out. You know what I mean? It's like, it's actually something that we can help out. Right.
Yeah.
Having to rely on a drug or medication or something, whatever it is, whatever you need to deal with, whatever pain or challenge it is.
Well, and then this theory of like, oh, when you're stressed, you lose your hair, just kind of taking it like directly that way. Well, maybe it's actually because of the gut brain reaction that's happening when you're stressed. Like maybe that's a part of it as well. Your body's in this fight or flight state, thinking it's, being chased by a bear, or that there's this invader at your front door and you're, just like the dog is going crazy. That's kind of what's happening in your mind as well. So your body's not worried about growing your hair if it's in this sympathetic, stressed out state.
And so I recently just learned about the vagus nerve and how, and basically just how little it's being stimulated now. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's like the challenge, how like we have to try and stimulate it just to get this to function so much better. And you tell me like what your tricks are, but like one thing that I started doing a lot because I learned that it stimulates your vagus nerve is to gargle like a lot.
Yeah.
So when I brush my teeth in the morning and at night, I'm just like, it's the most obnoxious thing ever. And like, it's awful if you're in the room, but like, I'm just trying to gargle as hard as I can for as long as I can. Cause doesn't that stimulate like your rest and digestion? Basically,
It does.
right?
Yeah. So a lot of people have what's called poor vagal tone, meaning that they have poor vagal function. So that vagus nerve that's connecting the gut and the brain, that connection is not as strong, which can lead to a lot of gut issues, which sometimes your gut issues don't show up as your typical, like, oh, I'm bloated, or oh, I'm constipated, or I have smelly gas, or whatever it might be that you think of like in this IBS bucket. Gut issues can also look like autoimmune issues or mood issues, skin issues, hair, etc. So yes, gargling is a great way to stimulate your vagus nerve. So is humming, singing. I tell my clients, try to hum happy birthday twice before you eat a meal. So is that deep yoga breathing, that diaphragmatic breathing that you do whenever you're in a yoga class, that stimulates your vagus nerve. Cold showers actually really helps as well. So if you don't want to take a fully cold shower, you can take your warm shower that you like and then turn your shower on cold for 60 seconds before you get out. That can help.
Also really good for your hair. Close those cuticles
I
down.
was reading that the other
Shiny.
day, actually.
It's a fact. I mean, your cuticles lay like shingles on your hair, right? Like they're stacked like shingles, like that. And so when the hot water, really starts to like loosen up your cuticles, it like opens them up, making it everything like exposed on the inside. So the cold water will shut the cuticles back down and tighten it. And when those are intact and tight, that's when your hair shiny and smooth, strong, less vulnerable and exposed. So many reasons to do a cold rinse at the end.
Yeah, so you might as well for your hair and your gut.
That's really good to know. Cause I mean, everybody, I don't know, I personally hate the cold rinse. But if I really
Yeah.
do need to wake up, I'll do it for a couple seconds. But I mean, now you're telling me it's good for the vagus nerve. So like I'm on board. I'm sold.
You're brave. It's one of my least favorite things to do. I try to avoid doing that. I'm like, I'll gargle, I'll hum, I'll sing.
Or
The
anything
cold
but
shower is not my favorite.
oh
I
my
try to
God.
do it.
I know, I hear you. Okay, so now that we understand what this connection is and obviously why it's so important, let's get into diet and the gut, right? What do we need to eat? Some of your top tips on just right off the bat, like what's really good for the gut. And then of course, let's get into fiber and when is it too much, good fibrous options and such.
Yeah. So the biggest tip I can give from a diet perspective is probably not what you think. I think a lot of times people think, oh, well, what should I not eat for gut health? But the approach that I take is what can you add to your diet to promote gut health? I think just especially like in the culture that we live in, it's so focused on like, oh, well, these foods are bad and these foods are good. And I try to stay away from that stigma of just kind of classifying foods that way, because I think then that just creates more stress, which we just learned why stress is not good for your gut. Anyways, but what we do know from research is that your gut thrives on variety. So there's huge studies that show us that the more variety of plants in your diet that you can eat, the more variety of bugs that you have in your gut. you have 2 to 5 pounds of actual bacteria in your gut, which is crazy to think about. But they're living organisms. And just like we need food, so do they. So when people get stuck on these super restrictive diets in the name of gut health, they could actually be doing more harm than good, because all of a sudden their diet is whittled down to 5 foods and they still feel bloated and they still feel like they're constipated or whatever other symptoms they're having. And the reason is because they've just starved all their gut bacteria. So the gut bacteria that like kale are different than the ones that like almonds. And so what I mean by plants is, of course, that's going to be fruits and vegetables, but anything else that grows, on a tree or a bush. So things like nuts and seeds would also count. Things like grains also count in that as well. So there's studies that show that those who eat 30 plants a week have a stronger, healthier gut, which 30 plants might sound like a lot, but really once you start counting it, it's not. If you're making spaghetti and you put tomatoes in your spaghetti sauce, and that's 1. If you add mushrooms, that's 2. If you add zucchini shreds, that's 3. Oregano, you could see how really easily in one meal you have 10.
And healthy grain-based pasta.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a lot easier than you think. And sometimes it requires like kind of shifting that mindset of like, hey, what can I add to this meal to add variety versus like, oh, how do I like take stuff away?
I really like that. Because you're right.
Like, I think it provides more like freedom, in your mind. Like
it makes so much sense. If you start to focus on what to actually add, well, then you're naturally eliminating things anyways also, right? Like, it's like you're making more space for the good stuff, focusing on the good stuff, and
your mind is not bored. If you're super restricted on what you can eat, like you think about food more, you crave food more, your life revolves around what you can or you can't eat, and that's not a fun way to live. So if you're focused on this like abundance variety mindset of like, hey, my gut thrives on variety. And I preface that all by saying that, some people, it takes a while for them to get their gut to actually tolerate a variety of foods, especially if they're having really intense symptoms. Like a lot of my clients, it's quite a process, working on not only changing their mindset, but also getting their gut to tolerate food. But your gut is a muscle. So, just like you wouldn't go to the gym after not going in 6 months and lift your heaviest deadlift ever, right. You can slowly start adding in that variety and allowing your body to adapt to the foods that you're eating.
I love that. I think that that's just like, it's like you're just respecting your gut so much more that way, looking at it as a muscle, slowly adding a variety to allow your body to adapt. It's why, like, again, like anything, you just have to be patient and you have to take your time, and there's no quick fixes, and you don't want a quick fix anyways.
No, I tell my clients all the time, I'm like, if you have previously done some kind of like 30-day gut fix or 30-day this, and like you can't wait to be done with it, the question to ask yourself is like, is this sustainable? Obviously not. But if like, how can you support your gut long term? How can you support your gut not only with your nutrition, but also in your daily habits, like in your stress management, in your sleep, in your hydration? And how can you like create a life that supports the outcome that you want without feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for this to be over because this is miserable. And now I can't go out to eat with my friends and I feel miserable and, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, right. It's like making it a realistic lifestyle, just like anything. How are you going to incorporate workout routine in your life? Proper healthy, like hair habits, even like things to do on a daily basis. It's like, I have so much information I try to share to people and have them incorporate into their lifestyle, but I start one step at a time because everything can be so overwhelming. You take it a step at a time. I love that. And that way you do develop the habit and it's more likely to stick versus like, here's a whole new protocol, change your entire life so that you can get the results. I never believed in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many times have we tried things like that and obviously just failed, and just you like explained it so perfectly. It's like you can't wait for it to end.
Well, and then there's a lot of shame involved with that of like, well, I failed this versus the diet failed me, like if you're judging yourself for like, well, the reason that I'm still having digestive symptoms, or in this case like hair symptoms, is because I don't have enough discipline, or I don't have enough willpower to like stick to this rigid plan. Like there's so much shame involved in that versus like, maybe this isn't realistic and maybe I should find a way that is more realistic, and like how can I take some of these principles and incorporate them long term.
Yeah, that's such a healthy approach. I love that. Okay, let's talk about, okay. So we talked about the gut. We talked about how, are you there, Heather? There you are.
You freeze? There you are. You froze for
Somebody
a second.
froze. Okay. We talked about how it's important to not just focus on not to focus on what to eliminate, but what to incorporate. Healthy plants, a good variety, really helping your gut like function optimally. And let's chat about what to eat in the morning. This was a question that somebody submitted. What do you eat first thing in the morning? How important is the first thing you put in your stomach? Let's talk about that. And I think that this is a really important question because I personally intermittent fast, and I've been doing it for like a year now, and it's just worked really great for me for a lot of different reasons. But when you have fasted for such a long period, it's obviously really important, like what your body gets hit with the first. So what do you have to say on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, it is important just because, especially if you are, you have a restricted eating window or something, then like you do want to make sure you're optimizing that. And if that works, then great. And if that's creating more rules, then maybe that's not something, that's great at this time. But I I typically in the morning focus on protein. I tend to feel my best when I eat protein in the morning. I find that if I don't, I get that afternoon 3 p.m. like I need coffee now feeling. I'm sure everyone can relate to that on some level of just like, oh my gosh, I need a nap, or like, where's the espresso? So I find that I personally do better. I know a lot of my clients feel that way as well. So the framework that I teach my clients, like for building their meals, is focusing on adding protein, fat, fiber, and color to every meal. And really that's just based around blood sugar balance. So not only optimizing like what you're eating and getting in all of the nutrients that you need throughout the day so your body can function and do all the things that it needs to do, but also keeping your blood sugar stable so you feel your best. If your blood sugar is stable throughout the day, you have more energy, your gut has more energy, you're sleeping better, your stress is lower. One of the reasons that a lot of our clients actually have digestive issues that they don't realize is because their blood sugar is all over the place. They're starting their morning with like coffee and nothing else. And then they get that 3 p.m. crash and they're confused why they don't feel good. And so even just like switching around that and getting some protein in the morning can really make a huge difference. So things like eggs, smoothies, breakfast meats, if you like eating that in the morning. And kind of, I think one thing that our clients often have to do is like reframe their mind around like if they're eating breakfast, like it doesn't have to be breakfast food. Like just because you typically always eat breakfast food in the morning, it doesn't mean you always have to. So if you feel your best eating, I don't know, chicken and sweet potato or whatever you want to eat, like that's fine. There's no rule that says you can't eat that in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like, it's so interesting because like that happens to me in the mornings because I don't eat anything until like later in the afternoon, and then I have coffee, right? That's like how I get by. But I've been trying to slowly switch to tea because the difference is so huge in how I feel. Like it does something to me, right? I'm like wired regardless. I have like very like high energy levels in the morning, and through the afternoon, like normally, but the coffee does really like affect me. I can feel it. It's like slowly
Yeah, your
affecting
cortisol is
my
like,
stomach. Yeah. So
yeah.
you're saying blood sugar imbalance leads to gut issues.
Hmm. Yeah. Kind of going back to cortisol. So when your blood sugar is low, which it typically is lower in the morning, your cortisol is going to be higher. Cortisol is a good thing, but it's also one of those things where you can have too much of a good thing. So if you're running on stress and cortisol all day,
Okay.
that's not great either because your body's in this stressed out sympathetic state, which then does affect that whole gut brain axis piece as well. So the higher your blood sugar, typically, like the lower your cortisol is going to be to an extent. But the goal isn't necessarily to make your blood sugar super high or super low. It's to keep it stable throughout the day. So your body's not having these huge peaks and valleys. Because when your blood sugar does drop really low, your body is kind of going into that fight or flight stressed state,
Right.
using more adrenaline for energy than anything else. So yes, keeping blood sugar stable will help actually keep cortisol levels stable, which then helps not only your gut, but also your mental space, your sleep, everything else.
That's such great advice. Another question that somebody had submitted was constipation while traveling. Any
Yeah.
advice? And this is so true. Like it happens, right? Like immediately. I feel like your whole like system just gets off put.
Yeah, so our bodies are creatures of habit. Our bodies like routine. One thing that I talk to my clients about a lot is like having a daily bowel routine. I know that sounds so weird, but just like you would have like a hair routine, you can have a bowel routine where like you try to go to the bathroom at the same time every day. And it doesn't have to be this crazy routine that takes 3 hours or anything, but kind of training your body. So anytime that you're out of this routine, things can get a little bit crazy. So there's a lot of reasons. One is maybe your sleep is different because you're traveling, and sleep greatly affects digestion. That's when your body rests and digests when you're sleeping.
Right.
It could be that you're more dehydrated, especially if you're traveling by plane, you're going to be more dehydrated. So bringing like electrolytes with you could be really helpful. Making sure you bring a water bottle with you. I am a nerd. I always literally have this water bottle with me.
Everywhere. It's an
Yeah,
extension of
everywhere.
you.
Yeah, like I feel naked without it. So, bringing a water bottle with you. Sometimes you might need to take like a little bit of magnesium to keep things moving. That's definitely not a bad thing to travel with. A lot of our clients will travel with like fiber powder or just like a bag of like chia seeds that they can add to their oatmeal at the hotel to add more fiber. Because typically the foods you're going to be eating when you're traveling are going to be different than what you eat at home, which is just fine. But if you know that there are certain foods that work best for you, so like some of these higher fiber additions, nuts and chia seeds and flax seeds, and maybe dried fruits if you don't have access to fresh fruits. Traveling with some of those easy to pack snacks can be really helpful, but also just keeping in mind it's totally, quote unquote, normal to get a little bit constipated while you're traveling. More than likely, you come home and everything balances back out. But there are things that you can do preventatively to not feel miserable while you're on a trip. So hydration really is the biggest thing I would recommend, is making sure you're drinking plenty of water. Try to get some movement in throughout the day, pack those snacks and fiber foods, like I was saying, as well. And try to have some semblance of a routine if you
Right.
can.
That's a really cool. I never looked at it that way. Not only like, are you not eating the same things, but your routine is so off.
Yeah, more than likely. I know for me, like, when we travel, maybe I'm on a different time zone or I'm sleeping in later than I normally do. A lot of our clients will say, like, if I don't go to the bathroom in the morning, then I'm not going for the rest of the day. And obviously, the anxiety that's like paired with that is not a great feeling. And so kind of unraveling that and getting out of that mindset. But yeah, if you're sleeping past the time that you typically go to the bathroom,
Right.
um, you know,
Yeah. Interesting.
yeah.
You throw everything off and you don't even realize it.
Yeah. And then it's been 3 days and you haven't had a bowel movement and you're super uncomfortable. So yeah, I've had many experiences like that in the past that are not fun.
All right. Okay. Those are really good tips to keep in mind. Okay. Our next question is about nutrient absorption. And now this obviously, like I supplement a lot every single day and professionally, been recommended a certain like routine, but um, none of it matters if your body's not really capable of absorbing any of it. And you can spend tons of money on supplements like I do. Like it's absolutely insane, but it's so important to me. Like it comes first, right? Like I will make any kind of sacrifice I have to in order to have all my supplements. But
Yeah.
you have to absorb these things properly. And I know I've struggled with absorption issues because I would literally take certain supplements and then get my blood work done, and I'd be like void and like a lot of the things I was specifically taking. So we had to
Mhm.
go in and kind of have like a little bit of a gut protocol for me first before we could even handle any issue that I was trying to tackle. Right. It was like, okay, rewind, come back. We need to work on your gut because if we're going to fix anything else, like this is what matters. So
Mhm.
can you help with symptoms of maybe nutrient absorption difficulties um, or any kind of solutions that you have and how we can make sure that we are absorbing everything
Mhm.
best of our body's ability?
So some easy to pinpoint symptoms. One would be like cracks on the outside of your mouth. A lot of times that has to do with B12 deficiency. Um, if you have white spots on your nails, like little white horizontal lines, that could be zinc deficiency. If you have loss of
Wow.
smell, which I feel weird saying in the COVID world, but sometimes that's zinc deficiency. Um, but absorption all requires stomach acid. So, one of the reasons that I see a lot of our clients have absorption issues is that their stomach acid is low. So, whether they've previously been on a PPI, which is a proton pump inhibitor, maybe they were prescribed that for acid reflux or a gurgly stomach or whatever it might be, their stomach acid is super low, and you need stomach acid to absorb a lot of the minerals, things like zinc and vitamins like B12. And if your stomach acid is low, it's going to kind of perpetuate that cycle. And it can be a vicious cycle too, because you need those things to actually help produce stomach acid. So sometimes we kind of get into this chicken or egg scenario where it's like, was it the minerals or was it the stomach acid? Who knows what happened first?
Right.
Um, but the number one thing that lowers stomach acid for a lot of people is stress. And so that kind of goes back to that whole gut brain axis. Your stress in your mind affects more than just your mind. It's having physical effects on your body, how you're then digesting and absorbing your food. And it can have long term effects on stomach acid levels. And I think we live in a world where most people are told that they have too high of stomach acid. So they're constantly on medications to suppress it. But the reality is that most people actually have the opposite problem. And so it can lead to other things down the road. So, yes, absorption issues are probably more common than people realize. And it's not uncommon that people are taking, hundreds of dollars worth of supplements a month and they're just wasting their money because they're not doing anything for them. Which is where like a lot of the lifestyle stuff comes in. If you're taking like all these supplements and you're not sleeping at night and you're super stressed and you're not drinking water and like you can't necessarily out supplement not sleeping or not managing your stress, which I actually saw this Instagram post yesterday that was like, I think a lot of people have the mindset that they will manage their stress when they're out of a stressful situation. I think we're missing the point. And I just thought that was really helpful kind of written that way, because it's true. It's like, well, once this season is over, then I'll work on, deep breathing every day or gratitude journaling or whatever it is that helps them manage their stress. Um, but that's really the key player in a lot of this, is working on kind of getting your body out of that stressed out fight or flight state where your body's not worried about digesting a meal, and more worried about running away as fast as possible from the bear or attacking that person that's at your door, as your dog is barking. So, yeah.
And so like, this is something that I also had to discover about stomach acidity, because when I was trying to, and we chatted about this really briefly on our first like intro call, but we were trying to understand why I was having absorbency issues. And we did that stomach acidity test with my practitioner. So we did the baking soda
Yeah.
on like an empty stomach test, and you'd have to see how long it would take for you to like burp or like have that kind of reaction. And it just like never happened.
Yeah.
And so they're like, okay, that's terrible. That's a really terrible sign, because good stomach acid levels, like you would have immediately like reacted to that, and you would have had that burp from the baking soda, right?
Yeah. If it
So
makes you feel better, most of our clients do the baking soda test and they never burp. So
right.
you're in good company. You're not
It does
alone.
make me feel a lot. I haven't done it in a while. How do you do it again? How much do you take?
It's a quarter teaspoon of baking soda and 4 ounces of water.
Right.
And if you burp within 3 minutes, that's like pretty good. If you burp within five, like you're kind of okay. And then, like most people, if you don't burp, we have a problem.
Right. So what do you do? I mean, this was like 2 years ago for me when I started doing that. What do you do when you discover this?
Yeah, it's going to vary on the individual because there's a lot of other factors that affect this. So, one thing that we often see in our clients is something called H. pylori. It's an infection that can happen, and that actually lowers stomach acid. So, a lot of people will say, well, I failed the baking soda test. I guess I need to take betaine HCl, which is hydrochloric acid. And what happens is then all of a sudden their stomach is burning and they're super uncomfortable and they're having all these symptoms. And it's because they probably have H. pylori, and you have to address the H. pylori first before you start supplementing with betaine. So something like digestive bitters is a lot safer if you don't know like the whole picture of your health, because you don't want to like fix one problem and cause another problem. But also at the end of the day, it's helpful to know if you have H. pylori, because that's going to lower your stomach acid, and you don't want to be like taking digestive bitters forever either. So they're not super tasty. I don't know if
Right.
you've done
What's
them
an
in the
example?
past.
I had tinctures of them that I tried one time, and I don't know if I maybe just didn't stick to it long enough, but I got off of that protocol. What is an example of a digestive bitters?
So there's lots of brands. Like you can get them on Amazon, you can get them at your like local health food store, and there's lots of brands. But digestive bitters are basically bitter herbs. So they're like, it's in a tincture. It's usually like in a dropper bottle, and it might have like licorice root in it. It might have like other bitter foods would be like arugula, or chocolate is actually a really bitter food. It's typically not in digestive bitters, but basically it's exactly what the name is. It's bitter foods to help you with digestion. So they work a lot more gently in that they help your digestive system to secrete digestive juices, versus like hydrochloric acid or betaine HCl is going to be like actual acid. So that is typically a lot stronger, but not a lot of people tolerate that from the get-go, just depending on the whole entirety of what else is going on with them.
Do you take digestive bitters on a daily basis yourself?
I
No.
don't anymore. I used to. I
Got it.
try to include bitter foods in my diet. Including bitter foods with your meals can help with that like digestive process. So I try to kind of going back to that, like, well, what can I add? I always am kind of thinking like, what bitter things do I have that I can add that help with digestion? When I was pregnant, I took digestive enzymes because I found like my digestion was just kind of off.
Yeah.
But like on a daily basis, I don't take them anymore. I have in the past, but not anymore.
Okay. Okay. So was there anything else about stomach acidity? So we have symptoms of, like deficiencies from certain minerals that you have. And basically, like, I know like my low stomach acid was an issue when I would eat like things like tomatoes and too much lemon juice and like certain acidic foods that would just like destroy my stomach. Like if I had like I was abroad, like having a Mediterranean diet mostly, and it just like kind of killed me because there's so many tomatoes and eggplants and lemon juice on everything. And it was awful and painful. And that's when it first started and I recognized. Is there anything else? Any other tips that you have on that?
So all the vagus nerve stuff helps with stomach acidity. So if you're stimulating your vagus nerve, that's helping your body to produce those digestive juices, including stomach acid. So that's where like humming happy birthday before you eat could be really helpful, or taking some really deep breaths before you eat, kind of getting your body into that rest and digest state. You can kind of see how all this is connected. If you're sitting down to eat and you're also watching the news and seeing like some horrible news that's giving you anxiety, your body is immediately going into a stressed state and not worried about eating the meal. So trying to get your body in a relaxed state and eat your food and only eat and chew it really well. Even like that cephalic phase of digestion, which is like the phase really before you ever even take a bite, like smelling your food, looking at your food. Everyone's had an experience where they walk by a bakery and they smell something super delicious and they start salivating. That's your body preparing to eat a meal. So if you're rushing from like your Zoom call to like trying to take some bites here and there, which everyone is guilty of this, myself included,
Right.
your body, that's not top of mind. Your brain isn't thinking, oh, I need to prepare to eat a meal. So just prioritizing like even that pre-meal experience can make a huge difference. We tend to like work in a culture that is very rushed. I was actually having a conversation with my husband the other day, and he said, I think now that everyone is working remotely, like people don't respect the lunch hour anymore. Like it's like, oh, all of a sudden I have a lunch Zoom call that I never used to have. And I feel like that's kind of affected digestion, for a lot of people, just constantly being on screens and calls all day and never having like that time to actually like sit at a table, smell the food, cook the food, eat the food, and enjoy it.
Right. We completely skip over that whole thing. It's like we have to respect the act.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
such a great tip, Heather. Like you're already shifting my whole like approach to this right now, because I love that we do rush into everything. We eat it. Body's not prepared. We won't be able to break it down properly. That makes so much sense. And I was going to ask what food to avoid to prevent stomach acidity, but now I'm recognizing it's not about what to eliminate, it's what to add.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, some people do have triggers. Like if every time you're eating something, you're like in terrible stomach pain, maybe think like, hey, what could I have instead? It's, yeah. But, at the end of the day, if you can identify what's going on in the gut and what the problem is, typically you're going to tolerate food a lot better. So there might be a period of time where there are dietary triggers that are causing symptoms, but if you can kind of get to that root problem, then the food isn't always, it's more of a processing issue versus a food issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does so much sense, actually. Okay, so you have, you have people, you work with clients, you have people that reach out with you on Instagram. Your account is amazing, by the way. So much great knowledge. If you don't already follow Heather, make sure you do so, because it's just unreal information that honestly, I don't think enough people focus on. What are messages that you constantly have, like you find yourself repeating to people, right? Like what are things that like the most common messages you're trying to put out to help people, right? Like the common questions, people are, facing these same questions, these same issues. What is it that you're I know as an expert in my industry, I'm constantly repeating the same thing to people. There's like the certain habits you're trying to change and help people with. What are those things in your field?
Yeah, there's a couple. So the first thing is back to that stress piece. So I think people don't realize how much stress in all forms affects their digestion. So not just stress about like, oh, I'm stressed because I have this meeting, but also the other stressors on their body, being dehydrated, not sleeping enough, being in a toxic relationship. Over exercising is actually a stress on the body that a lot of our clients struggle with, just being really nutrient depleted and deprived. Under eating is another stress that a lot of people don't even realize. Like they're so bloated, they're so uncomfortable, they're so miserable that they don't eat enough and they're wondering why they're not getting better. And it's because their body doesn't have the fuel. So when I talk about stress, I'm really meaning like stress in every possible form. But yeah, that's a big one. It's just how much stress affects everything digestion wise and gut wise. The other one is kind of what we were talking about at the beginning. Like sometimes it's not a food issue, it's a processing issue. So it's getting down to those like underlying causes of, instead of, well, let's just stay on this super restricted diet forever and then you can manage your constipation and now you feel isolated and depressed and hopeless about like ever feeling better. Let's look at it from, well, why aren't you tolerating these foods, or what's going on in your gut that's causing you to feel this way? And focusing on fixing those things so that then you're not as stressed when you go on vacation or you go out to eat with friends and like all of a sudden the menu doesn't have anything that you can order, because there's no worse feeling than that, when you're just like, there's nothing you feel like you can eat, or nothing you feel like is going to work for you.
Right. Or that's okay. And then whatever you are eating, it's with so much guilt and
Exactly. And then like, it's like,
yeah.
is it the stress about the food or is it the actual food? If you're immediately thinking this meal is going to make me bloated, of course it's going to make you bloated. Like your mindset is so powerful, especially if you're in that like stress response while you're eating. That can sometimes affect your response to the food more than the food itself. Um, yeah, I mean, those would really be the top things. And then I guess the last thing is uh, like relying on supplements alone to fix the gut. Like I said, if you're not sleeping, if you're ultra stressed, if you're not eating enough, if there's other factors that are contributing and you're just trying to take only supplements, that's why a lot of clients end up in our program, is because they've done the restricted diet and supplement only approach before and they didn't get any better, and they're looking for a different way. So yeah, supplements alone won't work. Supplements are meant to supplement everything else in your life.
What are some questions that you see, like repetitive kind of questions? Like what do people come to you with? Like, hey, I'm constipated, I'm bloated. Like what is like the most common thing that people come to you with?
I would say probably the most common is more like, will this food fix my constipation? Like, insert kind of trendy item here. Like,
Right.
will celery juice fix my gut? Or will this?
Will it? And let's get this out of the way since you mentioned it. The celery thing has driven me crazy. I never did it because I just couldn't believe in the superpowers of it. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to drink celery juice in the morning, knock yourself out. Personally, I'm not going to do that. I think the reason that people feel great when they drink celery juice is because they're drinking 16 to 30 ounces of water in the morning, and they're being hydrated. So,
Right.
you could also just try drinking water and see how you do. But I think people are like grasping at straws a lot of times, thinking like, well, if I just eat more chia seeds, or if I just eat more celery juice or whatever, then I won't feel constipated, but it's a summation of so many things. I describe it like a stool. So if nutrition is one leg of the stool and maybe supplements is another leg, but the lifestyle stuff is another leg. So sleep, stress, hydration, etc. The stool has to stand on three legs. It's going to tip over if not all of those things are addressed. So I think more the common questions I get are like very specific, like if I do this, then will I, not be constipated, or will this one supplement change my gut?
Got
And
it.
usually that's not the case.
And that's the quick fix that we're all looking for.
Yeah, I mean, naturally, nobody like, of course, we want that. And I wish that I had this, like, well, just this fairy dust powder and then you'll feel
Exactly.
better.
Exactly. I can totally relate to that. People will, reach out to me there and like this, these are the crazy DMs, right? And by crazy meaning I get so many of them. Like, hey, my hair is thinning. What do I do? What's the best shampoo? Hey, what supplement do I take? Like my hair is breaking and I'm thinning or whatever, I'm balding. Like, and it's like, if it was honestly that easy, like, then, we wouldn't need an entire platform for this. But yeah, like trying to help people see that there's a holistic component. Like you have to really look at the whole picture.
Yes.
So
Totally.
I feel you on that because it's so
It's
right.
like that with anything, it's like, well, I don't want to actually look into this. I just want to know the one thing I need to do is.
Exactly.
So,
Tell me, make it quick. I'll
yeah.
buy it right away. What is it? What's the secret? And it's like, oh my God, like, where do I start?
Yeah.
So it's the same.
Yeah.
And I have so much respect for what you do because it is truly like such a holistic thing. Like you really have to work with a person's entire life to affect any kind of results, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so let's get into some hair related success stories. Talk to me about some clients that you've worked with. Because not everybody with stomach issues is going to have hair issues, right? That's not always like a direct correlation, but I'm sure you've had some interesting stories.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes people don't realize they have hair issues until they don't too. So some of the success stories are like, oh, I had no idea how thin my hair was until it wasn't, or like, wow, I'm not constipated anymore. And also my hair isn't falling out, or, like they don't necessarily come to me sometimes expecting that that's going to be an outcome, and then it is. But some of the stories that come to mind, one is a client that came to us. She had alopecia, obviously was losing a lot of hair, and had a whole slew of stuff going on in her gut. And it was not a fast process. I'll be upfront about that. It was about 6 months of a lot of work and like still things that she has to implement daily. But, she was having like balding spots on her hair. She had tried every serum and powder and potion and finally like decided to look into what was going on in her gut because she had other health things going on too. Like her thyroid was really slow and she was constipated and it was showing up in other ways besides her hair. So as we figured out what was going on in her gut and addressed those, she did have H. pylori, she did have low stomach acid, she did have lots of dysbiosis, which means an imbalance of good and bad bacteria. But over time, like her hair stopped falling out, it started growing again, and it was just amazing to see that transformation. And looking back, I'm like, dang, I should have had her take like better pictures before and after, but oh well.
And
Next
6 months truly is not really that long.
No, I think, it for someone who's never done this before, it feels long, but 6 months is not
nothing.
bad. Was her hair fully growing, like all the way grown back in 6 months? No.
But you could see the
It,
results. You could physically
yeah,
see the hair coming in better. I mean, that's
yeah,
major. Low thyroid, obviously, immediately like
yeah.
affects your hair. And so the patchiness was alopecia areata. She had like the round, random patches. Did she have it once or was it occurring over like a longer period of time?
She had had it for years.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah, really awful. And I mean, just started affecting her self-esteem and her marriage and relationships. Like she didn't want to go out and do things. She didn't want to go on dates with her. Like she just didn't feel like herself, you know? And so I think that's the cool part about like what you do, what I do is like it affects people in more than just like the symptoms that they're having. It affects them in their relationships and their life. The other story that comes to mind is a lot of, and I don't know the term for it because she was never like officially diagnosed with anything, but she had like these yeast patches basically on her head, on her scalp. And it was super itchy, it was affecting her hair as well. And some of it, I think, is because she was itching it so much that her hair was falling out
Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was very similar. She had H. pylori, she had low stomach acid, she had lots of bacterial overgrowth. She, if I'm remembering correctly, had a parasite as well. And so once we were able to really kind of piece all of those things together, like the patches started getting better. There was no more yeast on her scalp or elsewhere on her body. I mean, it wasn't just on her head.
Right.
So, you know, same thing, like it was affecting her life and her relationships and just awful. So, those are like the biggest kind of transformations. But like I said, I mean, a lot of it is clients come to us with constipation, they have hypothyroidism, they have hormone issues, their hair is super thin, it's falling out. And then all of a sudden, their thyroid is functioning better because their gut is functioning better and their hair is not falling out anymore. And, you know, they're not worried about brushing their hair and like half of it is on their floor and,
Yeah.
or trying
Well,
to avoid blow drying their hair. So,
oh yeah, exactly. Oh my God. Like, oh, I don't want to brush my hair. I don't want to, it's like, no, that's not going to make a difference. But like, I understand it gets so sensitive where like, you just want to like preserve your hair as much as possible. It's a terrible place to be in. Yeah, your scalp will definitely react with like diet imbalances. It's wild, right? And people rarely make that connection. So I'm so happy that we're talking about that because you can have like excessively dry scalp, excessively oily, and then start to get the buildup like you were talking about. And yeah, like that's if it's something that like came out of nowhere and has been like progressing with time, you got to definitely balance your stomach out.
mhm.
Um, how do you know if you have H. pylori?
There are tests that you can do. So the test that we run is called the GI map. It's a stool test, actually. Typically, H. pylori is going to show up more on a stool test than it would like the breath test that they typically will do at the doctor's office.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's multiple ways to test for it, but a stool test is the way that we test for it.
That's really good to know.
Yeah.
Because it's such a common thing that you're seeing with your clients.
It's
So
super common.
yeah.
Um, and like I said, sometimes it will show up in the stool when like a client has previously had a negative H. pylori test and they've been like feeling like they're spinning their wheels for years. Like, well, why do I still feel terrible? And then they do the GI map and they're like, I knew it, you know?
Oh
So
wow. So the other
yeah.
tests were not as effective for them.
Well, it just might be elsewhere. Like it might have been more in their gut, you know,
Okay.
than yeah. So
Interesting. That's so good to know. This is so great, right? I mean, like, there's only so much I can help people with, and then I need like professionals like you to come in and be like, okay, well, all the external stuff that you're doing, which is what I focus on, is great, but it doesn't matter. Like, it starts with inside your body to begin with.
mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so Heather, let's finish with the last question today. I ask this question to everybody because you know, as you become an expert in your field and you discover more every single day, it obviously affects your own life. So what is
Mhm.
the one tip that you can share with everybody that you'll never compromise on and that you'll never go back on because it was life altering and it's like the most important single piece of advice that you can give anybody? What is that? What have you, Heather, specifically changed about your life?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things, but I'll keep it brief because that's the point. You know, just like a little background, I struggled with chronic constipation for 20 years. And like many of my clients, I felt like I had tried everything. And so The one thing that I will never do ever again is go on an elimination diet or a restrictive diet, because I spent way too many years doing that and it was miserable, and isolating and terrible. And that's how my clients feel. And so now, if I'm having a digestive flare or I feel like something's off, I look deeper and see, well, what could be affecting the way that I'm reacting to food versus like just randomly cutting things out and then not getting any relief. So,
I love that. Like enough with the restrictions
yeah,
and
like
focus
you
on.
might feel better temporarily, but then what? You know, then when you start feeling bad again, then what else are you going to cut out? And then all of a sudden you're eating five foods and yeah, it just affects everything.
I mean, that just sounds so liberating.
Yeah.
And it works, and you can stay healthy, and you can manage your weight, and you can manage your digestion, help your stress levels, right? Like
Mhm.
you've managed to do that without having a restrictive or eliminating diet.
Yeah, like I don't have to worry about every morsel of food that's entering my mouth. Like I just don't want to live like that ever again. So, yeah, my poor family, I feel like I would be like, I'm going to try being vegan, or I'm going to try this. And they're like, oh, here she goes.
Right.
you know? So, yeah.
That's cool. And you have kids.
Yes, I have a daughter. Her name is Charlotte, and she will be 3 in September. So,
So just the one, right?
mhm.
Just the
Yeah.
one. Okay, cool. So she's not like old enough yet for you to, I mean, I'm sure you started, but like, what's your approach going to be with your own kid, right? Like what's a quick tip that you can like kind of talk about with
Yeah,
that?
kids are amazing. Like watching her eat is like one of the coolest things. I know that sounds so weird, but I mean, we did something called baby led weaning with her, which is like a feeding approach in which, yeah, you like serve a variety of foods. You serve lots of different textures, and it's exactly kind of what the name is, baby led weaning. And so we never did purees or anything like that. We had a nanny for her first year, and I remember the nanny being like, you just want me to like give her this like slice of avocado and like what, and it was really, really cool. Like kids are just amazing. Like she eats so many different things and it depends on the day. Like some days she will like love one thing and then the next day she like wants something else. And so it's just a cool example of how like if you can learn to listen to your body, you know what your body knows what it needs.
Yeah.
And kind of going to that like intuitive eating place. So yeah, it's been amazing to kind of just watch her journey because she truly will eat anything, not every day, but she's willing to try things, which is
So
cool.
great. Oh, that's so awesome. I'm sure she's got such a great example to follow.
It's been fun. And she loves helping me cook. And that's like a great tip too, is like the more you can get your kids involved, the more likely they are to try it as well.
That's so cool. What a great tip. All right, my dear.
This
That's
was
all for
fun.
today.
Thanks
Thank you
for
so
having
much.
me.
Yeah, thank you. This was incredible. I have no doubt that so many people will take away from this, like all these amazing tips that you gave. And I think what you do is so incredible. The way that you're helping people, the community that you build with your clients, and helping people with this kind of chronic constipation and gut related issues. Like it's so important. If anybody out there, like it's not something you should be living with. It's not something you should be accepting, like having a stomach issue, right? Like there's something that can be done about it. Reach out to Heather if you want help, because she's the go-to person for this. And also like all you moms out there too, I think it's important to like keep in mind with like how you're, introducing things to your kids. And I've talked to this about some of my friends, and their babies are having digestion issues and absorption issues, and like, let's start them young and be a good example.
Yeah, totally. Your kids see more than you realize.
Right.
So they're little sponges.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. I can't wait for everybody to listen to this. It was so great. It was so great having you, Heather. Thank you for your time and for sharing everything that you did with us. It was such a pleasure. You're so awesome.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, and can't wait to share it as well.
Yes, please do. Thanks.
Bye.